Welcome to the Cybersecurity Magazine Podcast. I'm Philippa Jefferies, and I also have with me Anand and Prasad. And today we're talking to Tom Madsen. Tom has been in the cybersecurity industry a long time and is part of our editorial board, and is currently writing or finishing a book on zero trust, which is the topic of discussion today. So, Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I guess the first question we should ask is, what is zero trust? Like, how would you define it?
Well, there are many opinions on zero trust, and there's many opinions as there are people having opinions. My own personal leanings is toward seeing zero trust as an architecture framework. So, and that's also the definition that NIST have in their 800-207 standard. They define zero trust as an architecture framework. However much the various vendors wants to sell a product or a license and say this is zero trust, it is a way of designing infrastructure that zero trust is a design philosophy, not a product as such.
And what are kind of some of the important features of this architecture that make it zero trust?
Well, zero trust is pretty much a full stack way of thinking architecture, all the way from the networking layer, all the way up to identity and access management, based on who you are and what kind of data are you allowed. But it's just about who are you and what kind of network are you allowed to access. So it is pretty much trust but verify all the way through the stack until the end user gets access to whatever resources the user needs. And in that regard, it is difficult to implement a zero trust. And by difficult, I mean not that you shouldn't do it, but it is you need to start small. Most of the clients that I have talked to are looking at the networking layer. Then they go up until the and in the book I'm using vendors as examples, and even though I use specific vendors, it should not be seen as those vendors are the only ones who can help with a zero trust, because all the vendors can help clients on a daily basis. So their technologies are the ones I'm most familiar with. But it is a way of designing your infrastructure, whether that infrastructure be IT or OT related. The benefit of zero trust have just as much value on the OT side, the operational technology, ICS, SCADA systems, as it has on the old school IT systems.
Yeah. If I may, Tom, being a security person also myself, I feel that zero trust is a bundle of several basic security things that we consider. I mean, assets, identity access control, identity management, access control, things like that, authorization, all these things bundled together. Maybe a little bit more. Would you agree with that as well?
Yeah, I would. Okay. It is extremely important because you cannot implement a gizmo and just in the networking layer and say, now I'm zero trust all the way up through the stack, because you have your identities as well. What are those identities allowed to do? What kind of data are they allowed to access? And what are they allowed to do with the data? I usually advise clients to look at what kind of data you have within your infrastructure. Do you have credit cards? Do you have medical data? Do you have, research and development data? Who is allowed to access the part of the network that hosts and manages research data that you don't want your competitors to know about? And then base your design of the infrastructure to actually manage that all the way from the network to the actual access of the data at the end.
So if I may expand on that or request you to expand on that. Hearing you, I do get a feeling that it is not just technology. Yeah? It's not just
No.
putting boxes and doing things. It is a process and people. Yeah.
Yes, I fully agree. I usually see cybersecurity as a 70-30 split. 30% technology and 70% people, processes, policies, and stuff like that, because you don't really, or you can't really design your access rules without having a policy for who's allowed to access the data and how and change and stuff like that. It's not really the infrastructures that have value nowadays. Of course, there are capex expenditures when you buy stuff, but it is the data that's hosted on the systems, on the database and stuff like that. That is the key value for all companies, especially research and development companies. So, who has access to that data and what they can do with it is that's the way you should think all the way up through the stack.
Mm-hmm. So is that the real crux of zero trust then? Who has access and when they have access?
Yes. And you manage that at the networking layer, at the server layer, at the application layer, database layer, and you manage those and make design decision based on the risks based of the risk of people stealing the data, maliciously changing the data, or just lose the data because they clicked on something they shouldn't have. And risk is also great communication tools to the business people when you say we need this because then you can export this technology and all sorts of other stuff. And the business people will not understand that. But if you communicate risk, if we don't do X, Y, Z, then there's a risk of A, B, C happening, which has a consequence for the business of this. That's something business people can understand, not technology and protocols and ports and bytes and stuff like that.
And what kind of more specific security measures are employed in a zero trust system?
If we start at the network layer, then you are, let's say, we have talked about segmentation, and in recent years we've talked about micro-segmentations as well, meaning, for instance, my own personal favorite is there's this subnet where HR is based. Should HR be allowed on the subnet where finance people are sitting and doing stuff? Maybe, but maybe not. In which case, you then just block HR people from accessing the subnet where HR systems or information is located, and the other way around in cases where policy says you are not allowed to this. For research development companies, why would I, as an office IT guy, need access to the part of the network or infrastructure where the research data is? Do I need that maybe to manage servers? But what am I allowed when I access that? Should I be allowed to access the data or just be allowed to manage the servers, the network, and stuff like that? So when we reach server and application levels, then should I, as an IT guy, be allowed to access the HR data? Well, probably not. I maybe be allowed to access the infrastructure, make sure it works, so that HR people can do it. But I don't need access to the data. Hopefully, I don't need access to the data. And so on the individual layers, you make a decision on and design. And I'm a huge fan of saying good design is a good foundation for good security. So you design your network infrastructure by segmenting it to your needs, and then of course of that you also authenticate to the network, so the network knows who you are and whether or not you are allowed to access this subnet or that subnet and stuff like that. On top of that, you apply the servers, the individual servers for the infrastructure needed for the various departments within the company. That approach is especially important for life science companies, medical companies, that deal with highly sensitive research data and health information for people.
Okay, and I'm interested, how can organizations go about implementing zero trust to begin with? Like, kind of, what are some first steps that need to be taken?
Well, the first step is to make sure you know your infrastructure. For large companies, doing the big bang implementation of zero trust will be a non-starter. So
Okay.
if you want to do zero trust, then you would focus on a location or a factory for OT. And for instance, one of the clients we have now is building a new medical production facility. And of course, they have the opportunity from the get-go of designing and using zero trust for that, and they are doing that. Whereas they have a huge amount of legacy infrastructure where throwing zero trust at it would be, let's be kind and say, difficult, because they also have, just like every other client out there or company organization, they have a lot of legacy stuff. So it would be a process over months and years to implement zero trust. But the benefit at the end of the journey is much greater insight into what's going on in your infrastructure, because apart from designing the infrastructure, you also need to monitor and make sure that the logging and whatever events that you want to monitor in your infrastructure, so you can make sure that whatever policies you have are still being applied out there in the infrastructure. So it's not we have implemented zero trust, we are done. You also need to know manage it going forward.
So if I may, your book specifically also looks towards OT side, ICS side, I observe.
Yes.
Is there anything you would like to add on that side?
Yeah, on OT, the benefits of zero trust in OT infrastructures it's not a low-hanging fruit, but because for the past 10 to 15 years, a lot of IT and OT have been integrated, so that whatever OT vendor, Siemens, Schneider, ABB, whoever the vendor is in a company, needs remote access to the OT infrastructure. So they come out there from the internet through the IT and accesses the OT infrastructure. That also means that nefarious people will have the same kind of access if they hack or get access to the IT infrastructure. Then they can jump to OT and they can pretty much wreck the entire production network. And if the company can't produce their gizmos, they can't sell their gizmos, and it's very few companies who can survive that for longer periods of time, which makes the OT infrastructure very sensitive to pretty much all companies. And with the new EU regulation coming, NIS2, where certain infrastructures gets designated as critical infrastructure, the focus for a lot of the companies and organizations out there, water companies, energy companies, medical companies, and stuff like that, who have huge OT infrastructures, will be required by law to secure the infrastructures. Zero trust is the way to go, and that's also the recommendation to my own clients. Say, if traffic does not need to go into the OT infrastructure, deny it at whatever point of contact there are between OT and IT. So pretty much whitelist, don't blacklist traffic, whitelist this protocol is allowed into this infrastructure. If TCP IP is not used in OT, disallow it.
Understood. It's an IT and OT combination, and even beyond that, and the controls based on that. So sorry, Philippa, please.
No, carry on, Anand. Well, I was just going to say, you said that integrating zero trust into OT is not a low-hanging fruit. I was just wondering kind of what challenges there are in doing that specifically for OT.
Well, most clients have multiple vendors in their OT infrastructure. They might
Okay.
have some that's Siemens, some that's Schneider, some that's ABB, some that's a completely different thing. The client who has an automated forklift with a Raspberry Pi running on the back of it, automating
Yeah.
the forklift. So the heterogeneous nature of many OT infrastructures makes it challenging, because the various vendors will have their own protocols for communication with their devices out there, whether they be valves or PLCs and stuff like that. On top of that, a lot of OT infrastructure is ancient. A lot of factories will run on the same OT infrastructure for decades,
Yeah.
with gizmos that are no longer supported or maintained by the vendor, but it runs fine out there. So you have to make sure to take into account that some stuff out there cannot and should not be exposed to any IT, because they will break, or they are vulnerable, or they have not been designed to deal with IT traffic. And the heterogeneous nature of a lot of OT infrastructures. Maybe a factory will have a single vendor there, but another factory will have another vendor, and a third will have a third, rinse repeat to whatever many factory sites you have. So you might have to take into account multiple vendors in your OT strategy. The easiest way of approaching this would be to identify what kind of integration points there are between OT and IT, and then what kind of traffic is allowed between the two infrastructures. That's the easiest way to approach it. And then on the OT side, start when you are refreshing your hardware, whatever it is, start micro-segmenting it. Create policies for patching the PLCs and stuff like that. Because even though traffic is not allowed from IT to OT, well, then if you are integration point between those two infrastructures gets hacked, then they will still have access to the OT infrastructure. So patching will become more and more important for OT, and all the vendors out there have identified this. We need to make sure that we can maintain our gizmos in factory environments for X amount of years. And that's usually for OT equipment, decades. So.
Yeah, I'm interested. You said you recommend Zero Trust for a lot of your clients. Do you get much pushback on that, or are they quite kind of interested in taking this on?
Well, that depends on how many salespeople have been talking Zero Trust and trying to sell them a new hardware device or a new software license and stuff like that. Pretty much all the clients I have in Denmark are because NNIT, where I'm located at, is big on life science, energy, and public. Those are the three pillars that we are big within. And life science and energy will all be hit by the NIS2 regulations. And a lot of the life sciences say, okay, let's take a look at this Zero Trust. And if you start an approach to clients and saying Zero Trust is a way of designing or managing and implementing infrastructure, it's not a new gizmo in your server rack or anything like that. They're much more approachable to talk about, as long as you play with open cards and say it's not something that should be approached lightly, and it's not something that you can do within a week or two. It is an ongoing project. And most of them will say, okay, we are building something new. Let's go with Zero Trust there, and then slowly, site by site or location by location, whatever, depending on the client, of course. They only have one infrastructure in one location. It's easier in quotation marks, but still, you need to do it on the networking layer first, then on the server layer, application, database, all the way up, and then focusing on your identities and managing Zero Trust, who has access to what. And whether or not they can do that also depends on the security maturity of the client. And maturity is not a negative way of putting it, but whether or not they are ready for taking a Zero Trust journey also depends on where are they now on their IT do they have a lot of legacy? Do they have
Yeah.
what kind of clients do they have? So zero trust is the way to go, but it's not an easy route to take, and you need to make sure the client understand that.
So
Take it seriously, but the benefits at the end are they're worth the journey.
So Tom, I also hear there that regulations are a good push to make it happen. Yeah, is that right?
But the NIS2 will be make it a requirement for a lot of sectors, even sectors that I wasn't really aware of would be hit by it. But when you approach the client saying you need to X, Y, Z because the law says so, the client will just know, because they will feel like they have a pistol to the head. So when you approach the client saying we know this will hit you, and then we can help you without necessarily pushing a new gizmo or new device or anything like that. And talking zero trust as that, because it's not been run into the ground by marketing yet, but it is. A lot of clients are saying, okay, zero trust. I've heard about that for the past 2 years. This can also help me with the NIS2 requirements if they will be required to adapt to that. And then we can say, okay, let's take a look and see how much work is in it. So a lot of clients are open to that approach. But if you start, waving the law in their faces, they will look to someone who's more approachable.
Yeah, I find that really interesting what you're saying about how careful you need to be when kind of recommending security for your clients. And I like how you keep calling it the zero trust journey. I feel that sums up security as well. Like, it's not like you say you buy one thing and then your company is secure and you don't have to think about it again.
No.
You mentioned maintenance for zero trust. Could you just talk a bit more about that, how important that is? Like, it's not just you kind of implement all these things and then you're done.
Yeah, because after you have implemented zero trust, the business will develop still. They might get bought by somebody else. They will buy someone else and stuff like that, and they will have to integrate new infrastructures. They will have to redesign the infrastructure based on whatever strategy the business has, and they also need to then, in order not to zero out the work they have done for the zero trust, to make sure that, okay, we are thinking about zero trust when we integrate a new company, or when we change the business, or we upgrade our ERP system, whatever vendor that is, based on new requirements, because the new ERP system will also require you looking at the data migration between servers, who has access, levels of access, and stuff like that. So it's to maintain zero trust, you need to make it part of the IT or security policy of the company, so that whenever we approach or take a new project on board, we will then have to abide by whatever policy it has. Or if that cannot be done, then create a risk letter, and then have someone senior sign that, and we know this is a risk, but we will mitigate it or fix it down the road for whatever other reason that they have chosen to accept a risk for a period of time. So it's something you need to maintain, just like your Active Directory or your firewall rules or network infrastructure and stuff like that. So it's just maintaining an architecture, no longer maintaining a gizmo or a server or whatever it is.
Okay, we're kind of coming to the end of our time now, but perhaps time for just a couple more questions. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the future of zero trust. Like, do you think this will become perhaps one of the standard ways of security for companies, or how do you see it going?
I think it will be one of the go-to way of approaching new infrastructure or new implementations. it'll be an uphill struggle implementing it in legacy or old or in older infrastructures. But I think Zero Trust will be the go-to architecture way of designing new infrastructures, simply because of the benefits. And the clients, even though they are tired of having vendor salespeople talk Zero Trust when they want to push a gizmo or license or whatever it is, recognize that Zero Trust is a great way to secure your infrastructure. Because you have security all the way up through the stack, from the network layer all the way up to who is allowed to do what to what data and stuff like that. That also means that you have immense in depth. At the same time, you have a lot of visibility into your infrastructure because of the logging and monitoring and stuff like that. So it becomes much more difficult for someone who has gotten someone to click on an email in HR for them to start encrypting the OT infrastructure or the finance infrastructure and stuff like that. So you can kind of wall in your whenever you will still get attacked. We will still see a lot of companies in the media getting attacked, but you can mitigate and kind of wall in how much of your company gets hacked or encrypted or whatever the attack is. And if you then hopefully have good backup on another subnet, on another where you are controlling who has access and who can do that, and it's much easier to roll back and get whatever section of the company has been attacked back to speed, back up to speed in a fast.
Yeah, so it's not just about stopping the attack from getting places, but also kind of the resiliency of your company as well.
Yes, it is. So the smaller the section of the company that gets hit, the easier it is to recover.
Definitely. Okay, thank you, Tom. It's been really interesting. Perhaps do you want to just finish by saying a few words about the book and kind of what it includes and what it can teach you about Zero Trust?
Yes, sure. The book is like a 90 to 100 pages book called Zero Trust: An Introduction, where I focus on well, pretty much talk about 800-207 from NIST, the benefits of the individual layers, the network layer, the identity layer, the application layer, OT. There's even a chapter on 5G, the mobile network part. And why 5G? Because 5G is something you can implement as a private 5G network. And that's becoming bigger, especially in the OT, because a lot of those devices will be able to talk 5G instead of having a wireless infrastructure on that. But that also creates a lot of exposure, because if you design it right, then you will interfere or be exposed to the whatever telecommunications operator that have 5G in the same areas as you. So the individual chapters is on the individual layers, and of course there are examples from the vendors I'm familiar with, but that should not be seen as the only vendors out there. Whether you use those or not, the way of thinking is the same for the individual layers, and it'll be done in a week or two.
We're excited to see it when it comes out later this year. So thank you so much, Tom, unless anybody has any last comments. Great, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing your book.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.